Hey everyone, and Happy New Year. This is Zach here, and I'm going to walk through using a custom credential type to do Kerberos authentication with Ansible. So there's a lot of good information out there on how to do Kerberos with Ansible, and many people bake in a Kerberos configuration file into their execution environment. And that does work, but I found that using custom credential types is a much better solution, and it's more flexible, and it makes it way easier to maintain your execution environments and not have a sprawl of different images that are 99% the same, with the slight difference being the Kerberos configuration file. So with that, I'm going to hop over to my documentation site where I actually have tied this blog post to for the Kerberos credential type itself. So this is a custom credential type in AAP. In Ansible Automation Platform, of course, you can extend the credential types that are available built in and create your own. And what you're ultimately defining are what are the inputs that you need from the user, and then how are those inputs going to be injected into the environment. There's a few different ways you can inject those inputs. So first off, I'll call out that in this example, it's a very basic example of a Kerberos configuration file. Yours might be a little bit more complex, but I believe that using the pattern I'm going to show here, you could add and customize it as needed and build on top of it to fit your needs. So for me in the inputs, all I'm asking for are a username and password, which are going to be the actual account that these jobs would run, so a domain account. And then I'm specifying a default realm and a KDC, so our Kerberos distribution center, a key distribution center. And I'm doing that specifically for my sandbox environment. Ideally, you can look that up via DNS in my environment. I'm leveraging AWS EC2, and that wasn't possible. So those are my four inputs. And then ultimately, what's really important to leveraging a custom credential type in this example is the injector configuration, and specifically leveraging the ability to inject a temporary file. So what we're going to do is take the user's inputs, and we're going to use Jinja to template a file, which is the Kerberos configuration, into the environment. And we are going to set an environment variable to point at that temporary file. So if we look at our injector configuration here, you can see I've got my Jinja template where I'm referencing some of the inputs that are actually coming from the input configuration. So our default realm, as well as our KDC. We can even template like if the user provides the input. So for instance, KDC is optional in this input configuration. And if the user doesn't provide it, well, that section of the config file does not get defined. So there's a lot of flexibility you can do with things, and you may have additional inputs that you require from your users. And then additionally to the file itself in the environment variable, we're passing in a couple of special extra vars. So we're going to pass in the Ansible user and Ansible password, which are special variables in an Ansible job run, which is going to tell Ansible to use the username and password from this credential with Kerberos to try to connect to the target host. So I have an additional step here. If you use configuration as code for AAP, take a look at that. But if not, now I'm going to hop over into AAP and show you what this actually looks like. So in Ansible Automation Platform, I have a custom credential type that I've created based off of the input and injector configuration I just showed you. So you'll see here, I've got my fields defined as well as what's required, and then of course my injector configuration. So once I have a custom credential type, this is that first resource I need to create in AAP. I'm then going to create a credential, which is going to represent a domain account that I want to use, as well as the Kerberos configuration information needed to work with that domain account. So I've already created one. I'm going to go to the Kerberos credential. And you'll see here, I'm going to go into the edit view. I've got a Kerberos credential. It's located in an organization, which for me is called product demos. And then I've defined a username. So I've got my EC2 user at ansible.local, which is a domain user account that I've created in this domain. I've got a password for that account. And I'm also specifying my default realm to be ansible.local, as well as providing a key distribution center IP. Again, this is specific to my environment. That may not be necessary. But leveraging this credential, I am now going to be, if I attach this to a job run, that Kerberos conf file gets injected into the run. And the Ansible user and Ansible password gets set. And so that provides the information required to Ansible that if I am telling Ansible to use Kerberos, these are the credentials available to it for that particular run. And the beauty here is that it's not baked into the execution environment. So I could have different Windows execution environments and use this exact same credential. And I don't have to, I'm basically decoupling the execution environment from the credential itself. So the last thing I want to show is a job template that's actually using this credential. So I've got this run PowerShell Kerberos, and you'll see here I'm pointing at an inventory. So my product demo's inventory, and I've got a limit of domain Ansible local. So these are the hosts that it's going to run against. One thing I want to show though that is important is if I go into this inventory and I go into groups, I have a group called domain Ansible local that I'm running against. There are additional variables that are really important that I call out in the blog to tell Ansible to, hey, you actually should use Kerberos for this particular host. So you'll see here with my Ansible connection, I'm telling it to use WinRM, and my transport is going to be Kerberos. I'm turning off server validation for testing, I'm specifying the port, and then this WinRM KNet environment variables is also real important. So this is telling Ansible where to look for it, and as you'll see, this is actually tying it to my custom credential type because I'm injecting that environment variable krb5 config, and now I'm telling Ansible configuration, look for that file. Look for that environment variable, and it's going to tell you where the Kerberos configuration file is. So that's kind of marrying those two things together. And then the last environment variable that might be important to you. So you'll notice here in my host, my inventory host name, which is shown here, is not an FQDN. And so that will mess with Kerberos. So in the actual host variables, I'm providing this variable, Ansible WinRM Kerberos hostname override, giving it the FQDN. So this allows me to have a different hostname in my inventory than Kerberos requires, and it will override it when it tries to use Kerberos. If you use FQDN for your hostnames, which I actually recommend in your inventory, you don't need to worry about overriding this variable, but I just wanted to show it as an example. So now let's go back to our job template for running PowerShell against Kerberos and give it a launch. So you see here, I have a custom PowerShell script that I could modify. I'm going to leave it alone and go ahead and hit run. So now this particular job is actually going to run a PowerShell script and connect over Kerberos to the set of hosts in my group that I provided. And again, where I think the value here is that, for instance, let's say I showed you an example of connecting to host in the Ansible.local domain, but what if I wanted to run a job against host in the Autodotes.com domain? Well, if I baked it into the EE, I actually wouldn't be able to use the product demos EE for that other job. But since I've decoupled it from the EE, I could just create a new Kerberos credential, which has the specification for Autodotes.com, and attach it to a job template and use the same EE. So I hope you find this useful. I've worked with several different folks who do Windows automation that were really excited by this to not have to manage all the execution environments. So thank you for listening, and drop a note in the comments if you have any questions.